Since October, we've seen, about 10 to 15 major releases? I mean, this has been a pretty jam-packed year compared to at least the last 4 years of games. But this particular holiday season has been jam-packed with games. And I think a lot of us, from the very start, were worried that some of these games weren't going to sell well. But I think even some of us were surprised by just the sheer magnitude of bad sales that we've seen for many of the titles that have released since October. I don't really understand why the companies that publish these games didn't realize that this wasn't exactly the smartest idea. Even if I wanted to release something in time for the holidays, I would much rather release unopposed in March or April or May, even June. I would rather release against nothing or 1 or 2 games than try and jam in for the holidays to get in on those Christmas sales, but risk going to competition with some of the biggest, most prominent IPs in gaming. It's so odd, because you never see this in any other industry, where you've got multiple films that are competing for the same market releasing at the same time. I mean, they release in the general window, but even Batman vs Superman avoided Civil War because DC didn't want to compete with Marvel. Even with Batman and Superman, their 2 strongest IPs, they still didn't feel comfortable releasing in May next to Civil War to get in on the summer for you guys up north, for the summer sales, for the summer tickets rather, but then have to compete against another major film. So when you see that, and EA is releasing fucking Titanfall 2 in between Battlefield and Call of Duty, you've got to wonder, what the fuck were they thinking? I'd like to rattle off a list of games that I would consider to not have sold well, despite the fact that I actually like some of these games. In fact, a couple of these are probably some of my favorite games of the year. I mean, what are the clear qualified successes of this year? Pokemon, Sun and Moon, that is a definite success. Battlefield, though it actually didn't sell as well as Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, at least based on the information we have right now, but Call of Duty Infinite Warfare certainly wasn't considered a success by GameStop. It seriously hurt them. But what about the other ones? What about the ones where we can't even really debate it? Gears of War 4. Sales significantly down compared to Gears of War 2, which released at a comparable time in the Xbox 360's life cycle versus the Xbox One. Titanfall 2 releases on 3 platforms as opposed to 2, and has had diminished sales, which is a damn tragedy because Titanfall 2 was such a fantastic game. Dishonored 2, sales down compared to the original. Seems odd. Now, I'm sure some of that has to do with the fact that the PC port is awful, but even then, it seems strange that a sequel would sell worse than a new IP. Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, sales down. Final Fantasy 15, sales significantly down in Japan. Now, of course, we can partially attribute that to the fact that the gaming industry is kind of dying in Japan. At least the console gaming market, that is. But when Final Fantasy, which usually sells millions of copies in Japan, is selling just over 500,000 copies in Japan, that's a bit troublesome. All of these games have seen declines compared to their predecessors. Now, whether or not you consider the sales on their own to be bad is a little bit of a different story. I mean, I certainly wouldn't consider a game not breaking 1 million in its first week to be a success. If a game is releasing on 3 or 4 platforms with a combined install base surpassing at least 60 or 70 million if you're talking about the consoles, but if you include PC, now you're in the hundreds of millions. A game with a massive budget and a huge marketing campaign not breaking 1 million in its first week, that's a bit concerning. Meanwhile, we can look at the beginning of the year, even towards the middle of the year. Uncharted 4, massive success. Massive success, especially for a PlayStation exclusive. Doom sold like gangbusters. The Division, which released in March, to my knowledge completely unopposed, was the highest selling new IP of all time. It even surpassed Destiny. Hell, you want another example? I know that this is, some people will be like, well, the IP is so strong, but Grand Theft Auto 5 releases in September of 2013, sells millions of copies. Millions! In fact, if I recall correctly, in its first week, it sold well over 10 million copies. And yet, for some reason, there's this obsession within the industry to release within the Christmas window. I don't understand it. I mean, I'm hoping this year will serve as a lesson to these guys about the toll of releasing an IP that just never had a chance of competing in that kind of market. I don't know, maybe EA were trying to undercut the sales of Infinite Warfare, but it didn't really work because Infinite Warfare still sold better than Battlefield 1, despite the fact that Battlefield 1 was the highest liked trailer of all time. I mean, that's a topic for another day, the fact that trailers don't mean dick all in terms of your actual sales. Well, to an extent. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit. Obviously, the hype behind Battlefield 1 certainly helped it out. Titanfall 2 didn't stand a chance getting released between the two most prominent shooters of this console generation. It had no chance. Absolutely no chance. And it blows my mind that these companies didn't realize, hey, we've got a game that admittedly has large appeal, but it doesn't have the same sort of appeal as some of these big franchises. Might it be a good idea to release it a little bit at quieter time of the year? That way it's got more eyeballs on it because they're not getting drawn away. I mean, to draw it back to film like we did at the beginning, you don't see these small indie films releasing at the same time as massive Hollywood blockbusters. I mean, sometimes it happens because there's so many movies that come out, but a lot of your, Oscar movies, which are the ones that often don't perform as well as your 200, well, actually, that's not true. These 200, $300 million films are not performing well because they cost too much money. But that's another topic for another day. But when you've got these smaller films, they tend to release in the times that people aren't really going to be seeing these huge Marvel movies or Star Wars or anything like that. They try and release unopposed to the best extent that they can, because it's just the smart thing to do. Either you have way too much faith in your IP, or you're just completely fucking retarded. I mean, those are the two explanations for why you would want to release a game that has some appeal, but not nearly the same appeal as Call of Duty. It's just illogical to release a game at such a time. It certainly doesn't harm gamers. All it means is we got more choices than we have money to spend on the games. More choice is better. But at the same time, it's not like it would have harmed us if these games were a bit more spaced out, because then it means we get a little bit more time to spend on these games. I mean, once I finish playing a game that has come out recently, I got to move on to the next one. I haven't played Battlefield 1 in a couple of weeks because I've moved on to like Titanfall 2, and then I wanted to play Dishonored 2, and I've got The Last Guardian. I've been playing Watch Dogs 2. Whereas you get a little bit more time to spend with these games when they release in, May or something like that. You got a bit more time to spend with it. But the real casualty of this kind of decision making is the developer. At least, especially if they're an independent developer like Respawn. I mean, that's certainly got to be a bit troubling for those guys, because they didn't have a say in it, even though they own the Titanfall IP and they're completely independent from EA. And to be put in that kind of window, it's just, I'm not happy about it. I'm really not happy about it, because I've been saying so much that Titanfall 2 was such a great shooter, and so many people just didn't pick it up. And I don't blame them. You got to choose between Battlefield or Titanfall, and a lot of people choose Battlefield. That's totally understandable. I mean, Battlefield is a bigger game. It's got more appeal. And probably if push came to shove, I probably would have bought the same way as well. Or just some people are like, well, I got one. That's all I need. So even if they, they've got the funds to buy the game, well, I got one. That's all I need. And in a couple of weeks, I'll buy Call of Duty. It gets squashed on all sides. And the same happened with Dishonored 2. The same happened with Gears of War 4. The same probably happened with another game that I'm forgetting about. I'm pretty sure Watch Dogs 2 certainly didn't sell as well as the first game. It's fascinating. And I don't know if it's indicative of just a sign that game sales are down, which they definitely are. I don't think anybody can deny that software sales for games themselves are down. On consoles, at least. I mean, on PC, a lot of games are thriving. But in terms of these major games, they're just not selling that well. And if you got a game that costs at least 50 million, like at least 50 million for some of these games, if not a lot more, not selling up to even 1 million copies on day one. I don't want to... It's not a healthy state for the industry if that's how games are selling. I mean, obviously, you know, it will really tell when we move into next year and we start to see the same trend, or we see games picking up in sales again and people paying more attention. But I'm a little bit concerned about the gaming industry, honestly. And the last few months have really brought that to the forefront with just these illogical decisions that have hurt really good games getting the sales that they deserve. Except for Call of Duty, because they thought it was a brilliant idea to put microtransactions into Modern Warfare. Man, you're really making me regret not buying your fucking game.